All right. So thanks for joining us again for another product management book club here with Dr. Michael Crawley. And we are talking about product operations by Melissa Perry and Denise Tills. And we are now on part three. So we are going to jump ahead into that today. And for part three, we are talking about customer and market insights. So excited to jump in here. Lots of fun stuff to talk about. So we started off again with another case study. Love that they keep tying this in to really show us what this looks like at an organization. And one of the main challenges that they're talking about is the fact that, we know user research is super important. We know that user interviews are key. We know that having those insights is what drives the creation of a good product and also the maintenance of a good product. But they call out this interesting point that a lot of times that data isn't easy to get to. So either it's hard to actually do the interviews, to find the customers that you can interview and talk to, or the data is there, but it's being held by different teams. And personally, I thought this came at a very interesting time because I've been in my own role, looking for some data that's held by the sales team or the marketing team. And you just realize, that data is out there, but it's kind of siloed. And so, really interesting opening up on this challenge and saying not just, yes, research is good, which we've heard before, but what are the challenges to actually getting it and using it, which I think is really interesting.
No, you're
So,
absolutely correct, right? You have they as you go through give us some of the common ones, right? You've got sales, and they've got their data they collected and their drivers for that. The account managers, support, product managers, user research, and I've run into this many times myself where there's just so many different silos, and each of those silos, there's so many silos. So each of those silos have their data points and what's important, what's significant to them. Crossing those silos, as you just said, to first of all identify and know that they're there because you're not really operating inside those particular areas, but then
mhm,
also getting those data points from their respective silos to communicate the access to data itself, the communication, cross-functional communication, and all of
mhm.
those elements are usually really tricky in a lot of organizations. So your experience is common. I don't
Yeah.
know if you were thinking that, yeah, this is kind of unique in this environment because there's so much going on, but that happens a lot. I think one of the drivers for them putting together a model like this was they're saying, hey, here's a way you can go about thinking as to how to solve and address these types of scenarios that happen a lot.
Yeah, and I loved the fact that they brought in specifically compliance because I think that that's something we run into a lot where it's not necessarily that this team doesn't want to share the information or doesn't want us to do those interviews, but they're nervous, right, about, particular I know there's very specific rules about when we're emailing people that if they've been put on a list they don't want to receive emails from us, we can't send them anything except, maybe transactional emails or something like that. And then also just for the sales team, they're probably nervous about the product team talking to the customers, especially if it's, big clients, maybe for an account, what are we going to say versus, them, we don't have the sales pitch, we don't have that training. So I thought it was really interesting to kind of see the background of that. A lot of times, people say, oh, like it's tough to find the users. We don't know if that's a good idea right now. And so we're starting to see some of the reasons why that might be: legal concerns, wanting to keep lack of training, wanting to keep that restricted to certain departments that, have been approved to do so. So I thought it was really good, especially as a person in product, to kind of see that full picture.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
really good point.
Uh, Yeah. And then one other thing I thought was interesting is they get into this case study again, and they're talking about sitting down with these teams. Like you said, all these silos, let's sit down, break down the silos a little bit. And this one sentence stuck out to me where the sales team said, I feel like we submit requests to product, but they go into a black hole. And yeah, and the idea that a lot of times you don't have great collaboration from teams and you feel like, oh, this this group might not want to help or they're not interested in what we're doing, but it might be a very mutual feeling. Like maybe they send a request to your team, they don't usually hear back, you're sending stuff to them, you're not getting a great response. So not only are you siloed by department, but you're also kind of siloed by habits and feelings that, people
Yeah,
don't want to collaborate. Um, so I thought that was interesting too.
yeah, very important point. Those, a lot of complexities there, right? And they're so clear and present that it's interesting to see, refreshing, I would say, a model that factors those considerations in because they're real. And a lot of times when we run into that, we kind of wrestle with, okay, how do you get around this or kind of push the needle forward? And this kind of operational perspective of product management is an amazing lens view for which to see it. A lot built on cross functionality. I find a lot of similarities with what happens in Agile. Because in Agile, there's a lot of emphasis on the idea of cross functional teams and how do you get those elements to mesh and match.
Hmm.
And so in this product operations, they actually, for those who are familiar with Agile,
Hmm.
they actually leverage a bit of that mindset. It's a little different approach to doing it, so to speak.
Mm.
But the mindset and the way of approaching it, looking at it, and strategizing how you get these cross-functional elements to fuse are very similar. So those who
Yeah,
have an agile background connect with that a little bit. You leverage that agility mindset to plug into this thinking.
yeah, and always love that the agile tie-ins that you can bring to these discussions.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so yeah, they're talking about the challenges, and one thing that I thought was interesting is in a lot of product management books that we've read, I feel like in product, a lot of times we talk about the ideal situation and how to plan something, how to do something, how to carry out these different frameworks. And I almost feel like this book deals with what happens when it gets messy, as it does
Yeah.
at almost all organizations, and
Yeah.
fix it. And I don't know if the other books about product management deal with that as much. It's more like this is the goal versus like this is probably what will happen at some point, and here's how you kind of clean it up and fix it.
Yeah, no, and it's a very good point because you're right. A lot of the product management and product owner type of literature, and many frameworks and methodologies, it's this nice, neat, clean,
Hmm.
go from beginning to end flow. And you're right. The reality of actually executing, there are a lot of other complexities that get inserted, and many times in the framework presentations, those don't come up. They're
Hmm.
just like go from A to Z, and people consume it, and they're like, "Oh, this is I don't want to say easy, but you kind of see the roadmap of stepping through from kind of an initiation to a deliverable with no flaws."
Yeah.
But what happens in the reality of a when you're executing on a day to day basis, and people and you're dealing with personalities, all of the complexities that are there, business wise, operationally, what do you do when those bumps are coming the road? And with this product operations presentation that we have here, the way it's delivered, and they actually, that's part of the thought process is that you do encounter these complexities and these, what we like to call sometimes barriers, obstacles, roadblocks, so to speak. And it really looks at managing product with that in mind,
Hmm.
right? It's saying, okay, this is, these are the things that happen. And that's exactly why we're approaching product, operations is what the topic of this is, why we're having this conversation, because we want to solve these problems. So here they are. Here's how they may manifest themselves. As a matter of fact, here's a couple of case studies they've given us with Fidelity and a few others. And this is how, you can kind of push through using this approach. So yeah, to see how you handle challenging situations and to present that as a way to journey what product operations is and how it can fit into helping you solve problems is definitely a unique perspective. Yeah, I haven't seen that in many books either. Yeah,
Yeah.
on this topic.
So speaking of kind of stepping into those blockers, those obstacles, they talk about, okay, so what should your strategy be if you find yourself in a place where you're having these challenges? And the first thing they talked about, kind of a lead on from the previous section, was kind of clearing up that communication between your different departments. So sales, product marketing, making sure that people are able to have these conversations. And a lot of times, I think we find that you need a meeting with someone who's got a clear directive and kind of clear up, okay, what do you have and what do you need? Um, and I like the fact that a lot of the times in this book, one of the things they recommend first is doing an audit to see what's there. And a point they make a couple times in this section is you have more data than you think you do. So they recommend talking to all these teams, seeing what systems they're using. What are you collecting? Where is all this data going? Who has access to it? And what is it being used for? I think a couple of times in this case study, they have um, a person saying, I didn't even know that, for example, the support team was collecting all of this information on
Mhm.
the bugs, the different customer issues. And that's something that, of course, would be super helpful to the product managers, but they don't even know it's being collected. So, first of all, doing that, gathering all that information, and then figuring out, okay, how's a way that we can get this into the hands of the people that need it, that accessibility component, so that it can actually be used.
Yeah, they have a pretty interesting little framework here. This one's just jumping over to page 76, where they say, okay, well, how do we get our minds around this? Because as you say, the data is around somewhere, all over
Mm-hmm.
the place. If we can know that it's there, number one, and then collect it and utilize it. So they say, okay, well, catalog. What is the different resources that exist today? And this is even talking about the technologies that are there. It's considering the different functional areas that you were just talking about. And so, how do you kind of just see what's there, catalog it, and then
Mm-hmm.
contextualize it because it is coming from all these different places. And that data has context in their respective areas in sales and account management, et cetera. But when we get to product, where we're kind of looking at the overall lens view, the question now becomes how does sales data or account management data or customer data, or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
become contextualized to this product operations component?
Mm-hmm.
Because not all of that granularity in each of those areas is critical in context to what the intent of that data may be. So, of course, contextualized by channel, functional area,
Mm-hmm.
but then to pull it up to that higher level and extract those elements that are going to be relevant at that product level. And in that 360-degree view, they talk about create the 360-degree view. Nice little
Yeah.
chart here. And so now that gets the lens view of being able to kind of see with the whole holistic uh, perspective of all of that is, right? This is again from the product of the operations. Now they're talking about definitely understanding it from the customer perspective because that's
Mm-hmm.
what this product's for and that's who it's for and that's what the deliverable is all about to satisfy that customer. But to be able to look at that data from a kind of that high level, that 360-degree view,
Yeah.
product owner operations view is gives it, kind of ties it all together, somewhat of a glue
Mm-hmm.
to steer it in the direction that it needs to be for that level of thinking, right? That product level of thinking.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so from there, talking about the whole framework as a whole, then they start talking about the distinction a little bit between user research and market research. And
Yeah.
first of all, the fact that there is a distinction,
Right.
and then also, yeah, some of the pitfalls of each.
That's right.
And yeah, and I thought that was interesting because they were saying a lot of times people focus heavily on the user research, especially in product, because market research might be done by the product marketing team or a different department. So, like that they addressed it here, and just want to touch on a couple points in each of these sections. Um, they said two of the issues you run into with user research is PM teams frequently contacting the same users and or companies, and kind of creating an echo chamber with that, where you're talking to the same people, you're getting the same opinions, because these are
Right.
the people who either signed up, who want to give feedback, maybe they're super enthusiastic about the product, and like they said before, the difficulty of finding a large population of users, you're kind of drawn towards those that make it a little bit easier on you. Um,
Yeah.
so I thought that was interesting, because I've definitely seen cases where that's happened. And then also they said isolating the lessons learned where they're not pushed out to the whole org. And I feel like that one's actually one we've seen in several books. I think we saw it in Inspired. I think we saw it with Sprint, where they're saying, you did the user interview, you took your notes, but if you don't send them to the whole team, get them out to the people who need to see it, it's not super helpful.
That's right. Yeah, right. We good as
Yeah,
all of that good data if it's not going to the right place, right? That's true.
yeah. And then on the market research side, they talk about, the importance of market research, how that connects to the estimates that you can do. Specifically, they're talking a little bit about TAM, SAM, SOM. And interestingly, they had an example here of how an executive team was kind of misquoting the true opportunity because they were focusing on that total addressable market instead of the serviceable, attainable market. So nice to see how they showed a product manager coming in and saying, okay, actually, with an MVP, this is the market that we're actually going to be targeting, something
Hmm.
that's much more possible to create a persona around, to create
Yeah.
a strategy around. Um, and so showing how, market research is not just here are our competitors, um, here's where we kind of are in the standings, but also, yeah, where should we be, what different area of the market should we be identifying? What are some different ideas we can get for features that are working well, features that aren't? Um, and so just kind of all the purposes of using that. And interestingly, I thought um, they mentioned hiring former analysts from big consulting companies, um,
Yeah.
as a way to help out with that if your company, because I was thinking, they mentioned a few tools here where you can subscribe to some of the market research. They said that's a good way to get an initial hand on things. But personally, I'm not a data analyst. I don't know a
Right.
lot of product managers who are, and so it's good to see that they were kind of saying, okay, like, you really want to be good at this section. You have to know some of it in order to support this role, but you want a specialist who's probably already an analyst who can kind of dive deeper into the data, and help you out there.
Yeah, that's a little relieving, right? Because otherwise you're thinking, wow, do I have to become like an expert data analyst all of a sudden to
Yeah.
use this? Because it's one thing to subscribe to those databases, by the way, are very expensive, right? But
Yeah.
then, if this is not like your thing, which to your point, many product managers are not data analysts, then are you going to be effective with what you're able to extract from those database sources, and how you're going to be able to use them to zoom in on, what the goal is? And of course, as you were talking about with the market research, the total addressable market, service addressable market, service obtainable market, and then just the idea itself of market research versus the customer and
Mhm.
user type. I mean, who would have necessarily thought that we're breaking data into these various categories, these distinct categories, right? It all just
Yeah.
seems like data. It's going to be used. You get a good product out to the customer.
Mhm.
Yes, we need to do market research, but isn't the customer and the user and all these people all part of that? And when you get down to kind of the thought process that they were acclimating us here to, they're saying, well, no, not really. We want to kind of break this into different components too, right? User
Mhm.
is kind of its own category, market's its own category. Let's look at these things in a distinct way. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting the way they present that.
Yeah. And I'm just noticing a note that I had at the end of this section. They kind of break it further for market research down into two categories where they say part of the research you can get is from these organizations that collect it on competitors, that information might be publicly available or through these subscription sites. But they mentioned that another thing you can do is doing demo versions or even subscribing to a competitor's site. And they say the best way to learn about a competitor is to experience them, which I thought was really interesting. Like, get that first person view, spend some time
Hmm.
on it, see for yourself what the pain points might be. Um, or they said the second best way is talking to your customers, especially prospects or those considering a switch. So I imagine you have to be a little bit careful around that, especially talking to customers with other companies. But um, interesting. I don't hear as much about that one, so that was good to read about.
That's true. That is a little bit of a different kind of uh, thinking around
Yeah,
it, isn't it?
yeah, definitely. Um, and then they finish off this section with a another case study, and this one specifically is with Fidelity Investments,
Hmm.
large company. They mention one of the largest asset managers in the world, and the issue they're really talking about here is that they had only a very small group of user researchers, not nearly enough to help with the agile product development squads. So, what do you do when you don't have enough researchers to actually do that work? And they split it into two sections, helping the researchers and helping the non-researchers. And I thought the helping researchers section was interesting. They talk about making sure they had access to framework and playbooks, different different tools that they could use for running those interviews. Um, but I thought the really interesting section was the non-researchers, how they actually trained a number of individuals at the company to do some like low level research to carry out some of that on their own. Um, and then the idea of this repository they built called Lighthouse, where
Hmm.
they could store all the data and everyone could have access to it. And it really becomes almost like a wiki um, for user research at the company. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Like it brought to mind throughout history when they have like volunteer militias almost, where you're providing the training and then using that to bolster your efforts. And yeah, I just thought that was a cool solution. Um,
Yeah, it humanized it. They call it democratizing, right?
yeah,
Because the other end of the spectrum of what we just talked about in terms of enlisting, people who really are data and analytics people to get in there and help out, not just rely on our own, database fees that we pay and the fact that we can
yeah,
plug into them. So that's one of the spectrum. We do want to get those specialists in there. But
hmm
then, in democratizing, they're saying, well, it doesn't mean that people who aren't experts in this area don't have value.
hmm
And so, to your point, to train, the non-researchers to be somewhat functional, and to do this lighthouse type of research, a lot of this comes from not even having to be a super analyzer. They were talking about things like Google Alerts, right? You can sell
yeah,
those Google Alerts and say, hey, send me an alert when there's a conversation about this keyword or about this particular topic. And that's something that a person that's not a super duper researcher can participate in, and
yeah,
kind of keep an ear to the ground and help to contribute to that process. So, what you were just talking about there is pointing out that yes, we do want to get that super granular expert level, but at the same time, we can use other resources and democratize the process and kind of hit it from a couple of different angles to give us a little bit of a holistic perspective on how we're approaching research here. So that is really interesting. That lighthouse research repository concept. It's interesting.
yeah. Honestly, I want access to that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I,
Sounds good, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I just all the times you're looking for questions, like they said, that maybe have already been answered. So I just huge fan of that. Would love to have it at
Yeah.
my own
And
company.
so they put together this, and I guess this is something to think about, this research ops team.
Hmm
So this research ops team that put this lighthouse research repository together, a hybrid of some of the folks that are, super researchers and have on the cape, the analysts and all of that, and the lay researchers, so to speak.
Yeah,
But you can you kind of get that together and create your kind of your process protocol standards and come up with this lighthouse research type repository. I mean, that's the one they used in Fidelity, but I suppose we can have our version of it, wherever we happen to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so they finish off the section with how to get started with customer market insights. So kind of distilling down everything they talked about in this chapter into 3 points, which is great. They mentioned create a table of research insights assets. So like we were talking about, doing an audit of what you currently have, where it's coming from, where is it going, where does it live, so that you can, prioritize that and make the most use of it. Second, getting up to speed on market trends, like we talked about, and the different areas of market trends, and different ways to get a different look at your competitors and the market in which your company exists. And then third, assessing, the state of research tools. So that was the catalog, contextualize, create that you mentioned earlier, where you're saying, what are you using right now? Is it being used in the proper ways? And, does everyone have access to it that needs access to it? So great overall look at it. And yeah, just I think a really good summary on how to use insights, where they come from, and what you can do with it.
Yeah, that is great to the way it was summed up in this easy 1, 2, 3 steps that you just pointed out. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, because there was a lot going on there, right? We talked about,
Yeah.
the super analyst. Um, we talked about, kind of contextualizing, getting this data, contextualizing it, and giving the 360 view, and having to go into these silos. I mean, there's just so much going on. You've got market data, you've market research, you got user research. There's so much, and then they come to the end in the summary you just gave, and they say, "Well, how do we get started?" Right?
Yeah. Yeah. What's
It's
the
simple
bottom
as
line?
1, 2, 3, right? And you're like, "Oh, okay, wait a
Yeah.
minute. I think we might be able to pull this off." And the research insights, they call them assets. I mean, have I hadn't necessarily thought about research insights as assets. It just
Mm.
seems like something that the propeller head scientists go into the back room and you know dig up all of these amazing things and come back and tell us what it is. But so they are assets, and they're saying create a table of them so that we have this easy to reference list. And I think that's something we can do, right? I mean, we can kind of wrap our minds around, okay, well, let's see what these research insight assets might be, some of
Mm-hmm.
which we might not even consider. Like people are using Salesforce, people are
Yeah.
using Tableau, and whatever, all kinds of other things that are out there. But I hadn't necessarily thought of them like this, research insight assets, and then creating a little bit of a table there that just says, okay, well, here they all are. I mean,
Yeah.
across all those silos, across everything that's happening, and people know what they're doing in their little areas. But let's
Yeah.
create this asset table so that we have a bit of a reference point, right? To know what's out there and where it is, what we have access to. And the market trends. So obviously, of course, we're talking about the market itself at
Mm-hmm.
that point. So we've got these assets here, so we know what they all are. Now we're like, what's happening out there, right? In the marketplace. We
Yeah.
need to know. Inquiring minds want to know. And so we
Yeah.
begin to tune into that and then assess the state. And then that goes right back to earlier, that catalog, contextualize, and create. It was back there on page 76 or 79 or whatever page that was, where they first introduced it to us, page number 76.
Yeah.
What are the different resources that are out there? Let's put them in category. We have a table at first, which just is basically a list. Now we're going to catalog them so we can have them in their little silos. Is this sales? Is it accounts? Is it support? Are we doing this on a daily? This data points in sales. Do we need it every day?
Mm-hmm.
Do we need it monthly? Do we need it weekly? So we give it some nice, neat construct, and it's not just out there floating around in a table. When we start there in step number 1, but by the time we get to step number 3, we're kind of giving it some structure and some order so
Mm-hmm.
we can manage this a little bit better and contextualize, what is the relevance in context to their what they call channel,
Hmm.
right? Their silos, their channels. Of course, we get to the create the 360-degree view, which is us here now at this product operation level. How does any or all of that, or what elements or aspects of it are going to empower us to do
Yeah.
this? So they break this whole thing down as you just laid out in that one, two, three. And of course, those who get the book and have it as a reference source will have ready access to it. That this is something that all of us can do, right? As easy as one, two, three. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty cool. Getting us started with customer and market insights. Really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and speaking of one, two, three, that wraps up our second pillar that they mentioned. So, first one was the business insights, second one, customer market. And next time we'll be looking at pillar three, which is creating a product operating model, process, and practices. So, I'm excited for that one. Sounds like we're going to be really jumping into product ops and the logistics of it, which is my personal favorite.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. I look forward to that as well. All right, we'll pull this all together and figure out how that plugs all the way in to product ops. Exciting.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, so I look forward to that. Thank you so much, and I love your snowman back there.
Thanks.